Welcome, learners, to another deep dive. Today, we're taking a close look at a global phenomena, the often unseen influence of one of the world's, well, most powerful consulting firms.
Indeed. This firm has quietly shaped industries, governments, even parts of our daily lives for over a century now, and often operating largely, in the shadows.
Right.
We're going to unpack some, frankly, surprising revelations about its work. Stuff ranging from the inner workings of huge corporations right through to the corridors of power.
That's right, and you've given us a wealth of material here. Our mission, as always, is to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge. We want to reveal how this firm's pursuit of what they call scientific management, the system focused on optimizing everything for maximum efficiency, how that has sometimes led to some really unexpected and profound consequences. So let's get into it.
Yeah.
Okay, so for decades, this firm, they've really cultivated this image of objective, values-driven advice.
Oh, absolutely.
They consistently attract top talent, right? Often, these really idealistic young people, promising they can make a positive impact on the world, they talk about values almost like a religion, it seems, especially as a recruiting tool.
And what's really striking here, I think, is the tension. The tension between those, high-minded ideals and the actual practical outcomes of their recommendations, especially when it came down to cost cutting.
Yeah.
Think about U.S. Steel in Gary, Indiana. Back in 2014, the firm brought in this program. They called it the Carnegie Way. It was presented as this big turnaround plan.
Okay.
But the unions, they pretty quickly saw it as just a cover for really extreme cost cutting. And they raised serious concerns about worker safety.
And these weren't just like abstract worries, were they? There were real, actual human costs involved here.
Tragically, yes. In June 2015, a worker named Charles Kremke was electrocuted on the job.
Oh, terrible.
Yeah. And following his death, union protests erupted. You saw signs saying things like, McKinsey steals. And it came out later that the firm's compensation, their pay, was tied, at least in part, to U.S. Steel's financial performance. Which, certainly raises questions about the motives behind cutting back on maintenance and staffing levels.
That's a really stark example, but you're saying it wasn't just a one-off incident. There's the Disneyland case, too.
Exactly. Very similar pattern. The firm's advice to Disneyland also led to cuts in maintenance and staffing. And this, it came to a really tragic head in 2003. The big Thunder Mountain Railroad accident.
I remember that.
Yeah. Marcelo Torres died. 10 other people were injured. And the investigations afterwards found significant maintenance shortcomings. What's particularly chilling, though, is that months before the accident, a park employee, Bob Klostrick, had actually warned Disney.
He warned them.
Yeah, warned them that safety concerns were growing. He famously pushed back when someone questioned daily lap bar inspections, saying basically, the reason they don't fail is because we check them every single night.
So even with a clear warning like that, this drive for efficiency, for cost-cutting just kept going. How did the firm even respond to things this serious?
Well, their consistent defense, time and again, is essentially, we give advice, we don't give orders.
Ah, the plausible deniability angle.
Pretty much. So accountability, it typically falls somewhere else. They accepted no blame when their recommendations led to these kinds of outcomes. This relentless focus on cost cutting seems to be a core, if maybe unstated, piece of their whole scientific management philosophy.
These individual stories are pretty grim. But they're not isolated, are they? They seem to reflect this deeper philosophy that, when you scale it up, had a really profound impact on the wider economy.
What do these smaller stories tell us about their influence on, say, just the average worker out there?
Well, if you connect the dots to the bigger picture, this philosophy really permeated corporate America. It accelerated some pretty significant shifts. Take executive compensation, for instance.
A study the firm did way back in the 1950s for General Motors, it essentially set a precedent. It linked executive pay to the company's stock performance. And that really laid the groundwork for the kind of massive executive salaries we see today.
So this firm actually played a role in what some people call the inequality machine.
In many ways, yeah, you could argue that. There's a strong case to be made that this firm might be, and this is a quote, the single greatest legitimizer of mass layoffs in modern history.
Wow, that's a heavy claim.
It is. But they consistently framed job cuts as, necessary. Necessary for efficiency, necessary for shareholder value. And this happened just as union influence was dramatically declining.
And it wasn't just about domestic job cuts, right? You also found their fingerprints on the rise of offshoring.
Absolutely. The firm became a really zealous promoter of offshoring, especially to India, which they even kind of colorfully called Offshore is
The
Dan.
offshore is Dan.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Seriously. Companies like Ford, American Express, Microsoft, General Electric, they all offshored jobs with this firm's guidance and assistance. Now, the firm claimed this created a bigger cake, more wealth for everyone involved, both countries.
Right, the rising tide lifts all boats argument.
Exactly. But for local American workers, it often just meant fewer options, disappearing middle-class jobs. The slice of the cake seemed to shrink for them.
Okay, it gets really interesting, I think, when you look at their footprint in vital public services, healthcare especially. How did they operate in that space?
Yeah, and this raises a really important question, doesn't it? What happens when the same firm advises private companies and their government regulators? The potential for conflicts of interest just becomes huge.
Right.
Take state Medicaid programs. In Illinois, for example, they got over $75 million for advice during a major state budget crisis. This led to a new law reorganizing health services, even while vital services were, frankly, starving for funds.
And did these patterns show up in other states too?
They did. Look at Missouri. They won a contract there that was 3 times the lowest bid. Their advice on Medicaid changes, well, some believe it led directly to tens of thousands of children being removed from the Medicaid rolls.
Tens of thousands.
That's the claim. And then in Arkansas, they managed to turn an initial $3 million contract, partly funded, by the way, by a major insurer, into over $100 million in state business. And they did this without even submitting a competitive bid.
That's incredible. And wasn't there also this sort of revolving door issue where government officials who worked with the firm then ended up going to work for their big private clients?
That's a really key observation, yes. Officials like Felicia Norwood and Andy Allison, who worked closely with the firm on these state contracts, they later moved into senior roles at major managed care companies that were also clients of the firm.
So it creates this seamless pipeline between setting public policy and then benefiting from it in the private sector.
It certainly looks that way. It seems like they had a foot in pretty much every door, even with the government regulators themselves.
Okay, explain that. How did that work?
Well, the firm advised both the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and pharmaceutical companies, often on the very same drugs.
Wait, really?
Yes. A particularly stark example is Biogen's Alzheimer's drug, aducanumab, marketed as Aduhelm. The FDA approved it, controversially, over strong objections from its own independent expert advisory panel. The panel seriously questioned if it even worked.
So the firm was involved in pushing this controversial drug through.
Their behind-the-scenes role, advising Biogen on how to navigate the FDA, highlighting the agency's thinking on accelerated approvals, that's drawn a lot of scrutiny. And this continued even as former officials raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest that weren't disclosed, especially given the firm had substantial federal contracts with the FDA, often awarded without competition.
But I think maybe their most widely known and, frankly, disturbing involvement was with the opioid crisis.
Well, without a doubt, yeah. The firm played a really significant role in, quote, turbocharging opioid sales, both for Purdue Pharma, who make OxyContin, and for Johnson & Johnson.
Turbocharging. What does that mean in practice?
It meant recommending specific tactics, like targeting doctors who prescribed a lot, or even targeting high abuse risk patients, and significantly increasing the number of visits sales reps made to prescribers.
That's chilling.
It is. And there was that infamous internal email, right, from one of their partners talking about potentially needing to eliminate all our documents and emails as the legal pressure started mounting.
Trying to cover their tracks.
Seems like it. Ultimately, the firm reached a huge settlement, nearly $600 million, over its role in fueling the opioid crisis.
And their reach didn't stop there, did it? It extended into other controversial areas like tobacco and vaping.
It did. For decades, actually, the firm worked secretly for major tobacco companies, helping them sell cigarettes even long after the link to cancer was crystal clear and the industry was under heavy fire. Yes, this work wasn't public knowledge for a long time. It included projects specifically aimed at improving the tobacco industry's image, like something called the Cerberus Project. Later on, they also worked for Juul, the e-cigarette company.
Right, when the youth vaping epidemic was exploding.
Exactly. Despite that huge rise in youth vaping, and despite the fact that by late 2019, it came out that, quote, not a single Juul device in the United States had been sold legally.
So they're working for Juul while at the same time.
While at the same time, they were also advising the FDA on tobacco regulation. It definitely raises serious questions about their stated values.
Okay, let's shift focus globally. The firm's reach goes way beyond America's borders, often into places with, let's say, complex ethical landscapes.
And this is where that concept of values gets really, really challenged, because their work starts touching on things like human rights and pretty sensitive international relations.
Like in China.
Like in China, yeah. For example, they advise Chinese state-owned enterprises. Companies like China Communications Construction Company, that's the one that built those artificial islands in the disputed South China Sea.
Wait, so they're advising a company building islands that challenge U.S. interests.
While another major client is the Pentagon. Yes. Direct conflict of interest, it seems.
And they were pretty enthusiastic about China's big Belt and Road Initiative, too, weren't they?
Very much so. Their managing partner at the time openly expressed huge excitement about the Belt and Road project, even as other world leaders were warning it could turn participating countries into, quote, vassals of China.
Wow.
But maybe one of the most glaring issues was their 2018 Greater China Team Retreat. They held it in Xinjiang.
Xinjiang, the region with the Uyghur detention camps.
The very same. A region notorious by then for mass detention camps for Uyghur Muslims, widespread reports of forced labor, serious human rights abuses, all of which were very well documented at the time they held their retreat there.
So, while the world is condemning these massive human rights abuses, this firm is holding a celebratory corporate retreat right there?
Yeah.
That's quite a disconnect.
It is. It really is. Then, moving over to Saudi Arabia, the firm became so deeply integrated into the Saudi government that the planning ministry actually became known informally as the Ministry of McKinsey.
The Ministry of McKinsey.
That was the nickname. Their work there included doing sentiment analysis on social media posts, basically identifying influential critics and dissidents online.
Okay, that sounds potentially problematic.
It became more than potentially problematic. This work was later linked to the case of Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist who was murdered. He was identified in one of these analyses as an influencer who needed to be, quote, neutralized.
Neutralized? That's horrifying.
It is. A former consultant from the firm assessed this work internally, saying it was, quote, intensely political activity aimed at preserving the Saudi monarchy. Now, the firm officially claims they do not support or engage in political activities, but the evidence from their actual work seems to suggest otherwise.
And then there was South Africa as well. More controversy there.
Yes, major corruption scandals in South Africa involving state-owned companies like Transnet, the transport company, and Eskom, the power utility.
And weren't the firm's fees there just enormous?
Astronomical. There was an astronomical increase in fees linked to these engagements.
Yeah.
They got caught up in the state capture inquiry, facing massive public outrage and a judicial commission. The firm eventually had to admit that its governance processes failed.
Did they apologize?
They admitted they did not say sorry quickly enough and clearly enough, and they ended up having to refund millions and millions of dollars.
It's such a broad spectrum, isn't it? From huge national infrastructure projects down to affecting individual lives. What about climate change? Because this firm publicly talks a lot about its commitment to combating climate change. Is that the full picture?
Well, it creates a significant tension, doesn't it? On the one hand, yes, they issue these urgent reports calling for reductions in carbon emissions. They promote their green teams and sustainability practices. But on the other hand, they continue to work for many of the world's major polluters. We're talking coal miners, oil and gas giants. This has led to pretty strong accusations of greenwashing.
Greenwashing. You mean looking environmentally friendly without actually doing the hard stuff?
Exactly. Giving the appearance of being focused on the environment without recommending or implementing the truly painful measures needed to make a real difference to their clients' emissions. And apparently this has caused internal conflict too. Younger consultants have reportedly left the firm specifically over these ethical conflicts around climate work. And this pervasive influence, it also stretched deep into the financial world, into how money moves, how companies interact with consumers. And sometimes, again, with really devastating results. If you go back to the 1960s, the firm influenced financial deregulation, particularly with Citibank and this concept called matrix management.
Matrix management? What's that?
It's basically a decentralized organizational structure. It spreads responsibility, but it also arguably allowed for greater risk-taking within the bank. Some see it as paving the way for increased risk across the whole banking sector.
Okay, and this eventually led them to championing what we now know as securitization, right?
That's right. Lowell Bryan, a really prominent partner at the firm, kicked off the securitization project back in 1986. This championed the idea of bundling up individual loans and debts, things like mortgages, credit card balances, into these complex financial products that could then be sliced up and sold off on the market.
And this concept was picked up by people like Jeffrey Skilling at Enron.
Yes, Skilling was a former partner at the firm before he became CEO of Enron. He enthusiastically adopted the firm's asset-light approach, focusing on intellectual capital rather than physical assets, and also their pretty brutal rank-and-yank performance culture.
Rank and yank?
Yeah, where you regularly force rank employees and fire the bottom percentage. Many argue this culture, fostered by the firm's ideas, contributed directly to Enron's spectacular collapse and, of course, thousands of people losing their jobs.
So their advice is directly linked to the Enron scandal. And then fast forward a bit, the 2008 financial crisis.
The ideas the firm championed were deeply, deeply entwined with the 2008 crisis. That whole securitization of subprime mortgages that created the toxic debt that poisoned the financial system. It contributed to millions of Americans losing their homes through foreclosure and an estimated $22 trillion in economic losses overall. They helped build and promote a system where, yeah, profits soared for a few, but millions suffered devastating consequences.
It really is a disturbing pattern, seeing it laid out across so many different sectors. What did you find when you looked at their impact on the insurance industry?
Well, sadly, it's a rather similar story. Again, prioritizing profit, sometimes at the expense of the customer. The firm advised major insurers like Allstate and State Farm on totally overhauling their claims systems back in the 1990s. Okay, overhauling how?
It involved things that came out later in lawsuits, like these secret slides discovered in a case against Allstate. These slides basically showed the firm's advice on exactly how to save money on paying out claims.
Secret slides, detailing how not to pay claims.
Pretty much. They advised on something called the Claims Core Process Redesign and the use of computer systems, like one famously called Colossus. This system was designed to guide insurance adjusters to make quick, lowball offers to policyholders, especially accident victims.
Lowball offers?
Yeah, the goal often seemed to be to, quote, exploit the unrepresented people without lawyers, pushing what became known as a delay, deny, defend strategy. One of the firm's own internal documents, revealed in court, even stated the goal quite bluntly. Winning will be a zero-sum game.
Zero-sum, meaning for the insurance company to win, the policyholder had to lose.
That's exactly what it implies. It's quite shocking when you see it written down like that. So, looking across all of this, healthcare, finance, energy, even government work.
Yeah.
What really stands out to you about how this firm approaches its work, especially when the stakes are just so incredibly high?
You know, what's really consistent, I think, is this relentless focus on efficiency and profit maximization, often without what seems like a clear, robust framework for considering the broader societal impact. And then there's that recurring defense. We just give advice, not orders, which conveniently sidesteps accountability when things go wrong, whether that's a tragic industrial accident, a massive financial collapse, or well, even in the world of sports.
Sports? How did they get involved in sports?
Well, even in sports, their data analytics arm, a company they acquired called Quantum Black, advised teams like the Houston Astros baseball team.
Okay.
They worked on projects like injury prediction using players' private medical data. Apparently, this was done secretly, hidden from the players themselves, so it wouldn't affect their performance or morale. The Astros general manager at the time, Jeff Luhnow himself, a former consultant from this firm, was all about disruption and being on the bleeding edge of analytics.
And this is the same Houston Astros involved in the big sign-stealing scandal, right?
The very same. They were found to have systematically cheated to gain an advantage and win games. And Major League Baseball's investigation described the team as having an insular culture that, quote, valued and rewarded results over other considerations.
Results over other considerations.
It echoes that winning will be a zero-sum game mentality we saw in insurance, doesn't it? Where this intense pursuit of efficiency and winning, seemingly at all costs, can cross the line into deeply unethical, sometimes even illegal behavior. So yeah, we've really seen this consistent pattern where a focus, often a laser focus, on efficiency and profit, which can often be beneficial in some contexts, can also have these significant, sometimes truly devastating unintended consequences when it's not balanced with broader ethical considerations.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? When a single firm is so deeply embedded across so many critical areas of our lives, healthcare, finance, national defense, energy, you name it, and their advice so consistently seems to prioritize cost-cutting and shareholder value above almost everything else, well, who ultimately bears the cost of that pursuit?
Precisely. And that raises, I think, a really important question for all of us. In a world that's increasingly shaped by these powerful, often quite opaque consulting firms, what does true accountability even look like? And maybe more importantly, how do we ensure that all this expertise, all this brain power is always aligned with the greater good and not just, the bottom line?
A lot to think about there. And that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope this exploration gave you some truly unique insights to carry forward.